In this connected workflow video, we're going to take a look at how we can use 3ds Max to export to Omniverse and align a site with three existing Revit buildings that are on the Nucleus server. So I'm working with my colleague Robert, who has created three USD files for Brownstone 1, 2, and 3. And if we look in the stage, we can see that if I select Brownstone 1, that it selects the first building. Here's the second brownstone and the third. So they're nice and organized in the stage as well as with USD layers. And there's a lot more information that comes along with the Revit projects exports and extra assets coming from Rhino Grasshopper, and it's all organized nicely into three USD files. And that's what's most important for aligning the site. And you can see in their project structure under assets, we have brownstone 1, 2, and 3. And those are the most important things for me to align the site to. There's a couple ways you could go about doing this, but let's just do it the quick and easy way, where I want to select just this one piece of geometry, and I'll go ahead and isolate it. So in this case, we have a piece cut out that we would like to align with the buildings that are in Omniverse. And if we need to make any adjustments to the site, we can do that with a live sync connection from 3ds Max to the Nucleus server, and we can update those in Omniverse Create. But for now, let's just go ahead and select this one piece of geometry, and I'm going to end the isolate, and we're going to make sure we're connected to the Nucleus server, and we'll just go ahead and export that one piece. I'm going to navigate to the project. So if I navigate down to our demo pack project and we look at the assets folder, I'm going to create a new folder for the site. And we like to start with the app that you're exporting from so we can find our way back for a live sync workflow. So I'll call this Brownstone site. And I like to copy that name so we have a folder, and as well we have the name of the USD file so that we have all the context stored in this one folder under our assets for this project. Let's make sure to include MDL so we can convert V-Ray materials to MDL on export, so we don't have to worry about that. Cameras and lights can be enabled, but there are none in the scene. Instances are good, and it's optional if you'd like to save a Max file. So I'll go ahead and switch this one thing to export selected. That's going to ensure that we only export the one piece of geometry for this one test. So I'll hit export, and this should be really fast because we're exporting one piece of geometry. And now I'd like to work with that in Omniverse, but I don't want to work in Robert's world file. So I want to create a new working file. So I simply just have to do File, Save As, and I'm going to change this to a new file, and we'll call this 3 Brownstone, let's call it Site. Okay, so I have a working file as well. And when I save that, I'm not saving all of the USD files. I'm just saving the top level USD that maintains the folder structure and the sub USD layer structure. So you can see that was created in Worlds. So I have my file that I'm working in now, and they're basically the same file right now. But now what I'd like to do is I want to go to the asset that I just exported from Max. It's in this folder, and we're going to navigate to the USD, and all I have to do is right click and say Insert as Sublayer. This is the easiest way to add more content into Omniverse, and at this point, we can try to align this geometry to the buildings on the site, or we could do a live sync connection and we could do it in 3ds Max. So for this first example, I think I just want to show how you can use the tools in 3ds Max to, you could start rotating that, and you can see that's adjusting this transform here. And I know I can set that to a -90 to get the right rotation. And then if I use the move tool, all I'm trying to do is take a look at the X and Y direction. So if I highlight this blue box here in yellow, I know I can move that around and I can get a general idea of where that should be in the site. And this isn't very accurate, but it is a good way of doing things quickly. So that way I have a general idea that I've done the right thing to get the site aligned to the buildings. And you could do that conversely, aligning the buildings to the site. But in this case, The goal is to make the 3 Revit buildings the focus of the project, so we're going to move the site to the buildings. Now, I'd like to do that same process, but instead of just doing that in Create, I'd like to have those edits return back to 3ds Max so we can save those in the USD file and as well in the Max file. And I'd also like to have a little bit of reference for these 3 buildings in 3ds Max. So let's go through the setup to do that. So I want to remove all of my changes. So all you have to do is remove the site. So I'll remove that USD layer. And since we are working in USD layers, I was authoring the top layer, and what remains in this file are all these little triangles, which are the delta edits for the transforms that I created. So if I want to save those, if I had a good placement, I can leave that in this project, and then I can go ahead and add that USD layer back in if I wanted to take a look at my edits. So you can see that even by just removing the USD layer, all of the edits that were created, these delta triangle edits, are maintained in the root layer, and I can save those by clicking the blue icon. So in this case, I want to revert those changes, so I'm going to right-click and say Delete Delta. And you can see it's going to remove all of the transforms that put this piece of geometry where I wanted it to align with the buildings, and it's back to its original place, and I'll go ahead and remove that USD. So I can hit remove layer. So that's basically brought us back to our initial starting point. So let's go through a second workflow on how to set this up, and we can use 3ds Max to make the site align up to these 3 buildings very accurately. So to start, let's go ahead and reset 3ds Max, and I'm not going to save that. And what we want to do is we want to import these 3 buildings into 3ds Max. And just as a reminder, these are 3 fully flushed out Revit models that are a medium-sized project. There's a reasonable amount of data in there. So let's go ahead and bring those into 3ds Max. So instead of exporting, this time I'm going to open. We're going to navigate to the Revit exports for Brownstone 1, and you can see that there are 3 different USD files. We could import each one of those individually for all 3 of the brownstones, but you can see that that would add up to a lot of imports into 3ds Max. What I'm most interested in is getting the 3 buildings together so that I can align the site. So going up one layer, you can see that, or one folder structure, you can see that we have the 3 brownstone exports from Revit that are organized into one USD file, and then we can go up one folder higher to our worlds, and this is the file that Robert made that put all 3 brownstones in a row. So when I import this USD file, it's the same as importing the root layer, which is this top level USD, and it's going to contain all the information, which is really helpful in one USD that will be converted to 3ds Max format, which is going to be great. Now, since we already have materials in 3ds Max, I'm not going to worry about the MDL or USD preview surface. I'm really looking for the geometry. So I'll go ahead and open this file in 3ds Max. So this would be the 3 brownstones in a row. So when I click open, this will take a little bit of time because I'm importing all the geometry, which I think is about 2.5 million polygons for all 3 of these buildings. And while that's importing, I did want to take a closer look at the Revit buildings, which you can review also in Robert's videos on the Revit export. But what's really nice is that when you select one of the buildings, I can press the up arrow key and review in the stage that I'm moving up to the walls, all the way up to the geometry, and then I can press up again, and I'm all the way up to the top level Brownstone 3. So this contains everything for the Brownstone 3 project. So I can quickly review which building is labeled Brownstone 3. If I click on this one, I'm pressing up on the keyboard, and now I'm in Brownstone 2. So if I want to select it this way, I can see that in the stage. So it's very easy to navigate each one of the buildings. So if I wanted to work on anything in 3ds Max to enhance the Revit exports to USD. Okay, now that this is imported in 3ds Max, I'm going to go ahead and zoom out. Let's just scroll out a little bit to see what we have. We can also review in the Layer Explorer, and one thing I'm noticing here is that we also imported the world, and we don't really need this information. Excuse me, we imported the environment, so we really don't need this information in 3ds Max. So if I go to select children, I should be able to select the environment, and I can just delete that out. Now I'm not connected to Nucleus right now, so I'm not removing anything from what Robert's working on. I'm specifically trying to get a reference for where I'd like to lay out the brownstone projects. And you can see I brought in all the cameras, all the lights. It's quite a bit of data that I have in here. But really all we want to see is the geometry, so I'll just display, let's go ahead and hide the cameras and lights, okay? So now when I select everything here, you can see I've got pretty much a mirror of what's happening in Omniverse. I have a version of that same geometry at the right geolocation in and orientation in 3ds Max. And I can hit 7 on the keyboard to take a review. We have about 2.5 million polys. So this is what I want to use as a reference for the 3ds Max site. So I'll go ahead and save that as a 3ds Max file. I have one already created, but let's go ahead and save over that. And yes, we can save over that. And once this is saved, I'm going to hop back into the site file. So here is the Max file. And at this point, what we want to do is we want to export the entire site with the concrete and the asphalt and the roads and the curbs. But we also want to have reference for where it should be for a live sync connection. So I'm going to use 3ds Max XREF scenes, and I'll add in the buildings so that we have a very good idea of where those buildings exist in Omniverse. And when you open files this way, I have the confidence that I will not be exporting any of the Revit buildings back to Omniverse so that we'd have duplicates, because we want to use the content live from Revit. So this is specifically for reference. And if there's any edits made to from Robert on the Revit files, I can go ahead and make a live sync connection to this specific Max file, which is another way of having a live sync connection back to Revit. Okay, so now that this is in the scene, similar to the first test, you can see that it's not aligning on the site very well. And what's important is that we want to get this piece to align up in the proper footprint. So I'm going to reopen the Layer Explorer. And this specific piece here, this cut piece, I'm going to hide it. And this is where we want to align everything. You can use 3ds Max helpers and groups that will translate over to X-forms, just like you see here in the Omniverse stage. So that's why I have a few different X-forms. And it also makes it easy to select the top level X-form, like so. And then we can use the rotate tool. And you can see I can move all the contents of the site very easily. I'm going to go ahead and right-click to open this little pop-up window so that I can rotate this exactly how I want it at a -90 to get that to align. And let's do that with the rotate tool. Here we go, -90. And we can fly the camera around like so. And at this point, I've got it pretty close, but just so that we can see this happening with a live sync connection to Omniverse, all you have to do is export the scene, and this time I want to export all the geometry. And I'll go ahead and select everything so you can see that I'm selecting, or I'm going to export all of the site, but I won't be exporting anything that's in the XREF. So let's export that to Omniverse. I'm going to export that as an asset. I'm going to go to Brownstone site, and in this case, I'm going to export right on top of the previous workflow test that we did earlier. Okay, so let's go ahead and export that. And in Omniverse, I'm working in 3 Brownstone site file, so I'd like to go to Layers, and I'm going to add right back in this USD file by right-clicking and saying Insert as Sublayer. Okay, now we've added the site back in, and you can see we have a pretty close representation of what's happening in 3ds Max and in Omniverse. So this is the workflow to really be specific about aligning things using 3ds Max. And what's really nice about bi-directional workflow in Omniverse is that if I enable Live Sync here, I'm going to keep my local source because I'm working from 3ds Max. And then specifically what I want to be editing is not the root layer. I want to be editing this export because any changes that I make in Omniverse Create or in Max, I would like that to be stored and for them to be the same or identical in USD format and Max format. So I right click and set that as authoring. So now both Create and Max are editing the same geometry. So to show that as a quick test, I can select, let's go ahead and select just the top level helper node, and I'm going to slide this in the Y direction. So if I move the Y up and down, you can see I'm moving that closer to the buildings, and this will update when we turn on a live sync connection to Omniverse. Okay, so if I were to slide this again, you're going to see that's going to start updating. There we go. And if we select that as well in Omniverse, we can select the top level Max Brownstone site. That is the same as this helper node in 3ds Max. So if we want to do the same thing, we can adjust this left and right, and you can see that's updating in Omniverse Create and as well in 3ds Max. So it's really, at this point, it's a preference of whether you want to use the tools in Omniverse or if you want to use tools that you may be a little bit more familiar in 3ds Max. And I like to get very close with the spinners here. And you can also, if you'd like, you can use the move gizmo, and we want to just do that in the Z direction. So I'm going to lock it this way. And then I'm going to go ahead and fly in really close to one of these corners, and we'll make sure that we have everything aligned really nice. Yeah, let's do that. Okay. So what's important now is I'd like to get this corner of the site aligned with the corner of the Revit building. And the way I'm going to go about doing that is sliding in the Z direction like so. And you can see I can go a little bit overlap, or I can align it just like that. And if you want to, you can work in plan. This is also a good way of working. And you can see this file has reference in all of the Revit data. So we're aligning the site with everything as it exists in Omniverse, which is pretty powerful. Okay, let's go ahead and select that top level site, and I'm going to slide it in the X direction this time. Yeah, great. And I'll go ahead and fly in really close to that detail here. So let's slow the camera around. So I just want to make sure everything lines up nice and evenly with the corner of the property. And I'll ensure that we're moving in the Z direction like so. And I could even use the snap tools. Let's turn on snaps. And let's go ahead and move that to, see if this will snap for us in place, something like that. So we could go too far if we wanted, like that, or we could get it just aligned on the site like that. Okay, that looks pretty good. So that was a pretty detailed way of looking at how to align, a project on the site. But this is really important, to have an accurate representation of where things belong in Omniverse. And you can see I have a little bit of some mesh overlap here. So let's go through how we could fix that. It might be as simple as moving the site a little bit. Let's try aligning it with this corner. So if I grab this corner and we pull this to the left a little, you can see I can go a little bit far. You can see the gap there, but let's just align that perfectly on the corner. And we'll do the same thing in the Y direction. So you can also move in the Y direction if you want. And let's align that perfectly on the corner. Let's grab that and pull that right here on the corner, like so. Okay, and that looks like that's a pretty good fit. Okay, and what's nice is that you can always review in Omniverse and as well in 3ds Max. It's nice to work in Plan in Max sometimes, and then also review everything in Omniverse. So you can look at it from both sides. So we can review the ground hits the right part of the site, and we can fly on the inside and just review that everything is aligning pretty well. Okay, that's great. So that's how I would recommend working with a live sync connection from 3ds Max and Omniverse to align data in like the site along with the Revit model. And it looks like we have a little gap here, so let's see what's going on. I think this guy is a larger piece that is going to connect to the next part of the site that we're going to review. So let's just go ahead and put that back where it belongs, something like that. And if you can't align it perfectly in Create, just go ahead and work in 3ds Max. I think that's this mesh here. This one, we can go ahead and do a snap in both the X and the Y direction, like so. So we'll get that corner to align right on there, and that should pop that back into place. Great. Okay, and once you're happy with everything in 3ds Max and as well as in Omniverse, you can go back to your Layers tab. Let's go ahead and disable the live sync connection, and I'm going to reset my authoring layer to the root layer. So now we won't have any destructive workflow that goes back to Max. Everything will be stored in Delta layers in this top level USD, which we can save by clicking this blue icon for any future updates. And we can hit save there. That should be fine. And in 3ds Max, I will disable the live sync connection, and you can add a checkpoint if you'd like. I'm going to say no. I'm going to return to my 3D viewport, and let's go ahead and have a view that goes something like this, similar to what we see in Omniverse. And let's go ahead and save my file. And that's how I've worked in both 3ds Max and in Omniverse to align the site to 3 existing Revit buildings. Okay, thanks for watching.